Welcome everybody, this is Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors.
And this is Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors Group.
We'd like to welcome you to our K-12 Politics and Tech video series.
Our objective is to give you the absolute latest of what's going on in Sacramento that affects public school districts, obviously, and as well as all the technology stuff that's going on that's so vital to delivering for kids these days.
And remember, if you find these videos useful, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and share out over social media. You're our marketing team. We appreciate your support, and let's go ahead and get started.
Well, welcome everybody. Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors, back with another episode of K-12 Politics and Tech. As always, co-host of the show, Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors, is here. Kevin, glad to see you.
Always good to be here, Tim. Thanks.
Yeah, and our favorite and most frequent guest, Governor Bob Wise, former governor of West Virginia in Congress for 20 plus years. Always here and always happy to have you, Bob. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, good to be back. Lots happening, we hope.
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, yeah, that's kind of it. There's lots not happening. Every time we say we think it's about to happen, it doesn't. And let's start there. So back in DC, somehow there's still a budget that needs to be passed and a big infrastructure package. So just give us the latest there, particularly with the infrastructure package, Bob. How are things going?
So infrastructure, that one's good. It's passed both houses. The president has yet to sign it. I think is waiting for a signing ceremony. What does it do for education? It does a few things. One is it provides $7.5 billion for electric school buses. It provides funding in the multi-billions to remove lead from pipes, a big problem in particularly for a number of schools. It's most significantly, it provides $65 billion for broadband and internet extension and connectivity. About $42 billion to do direct what they call deployment grants to areas to extend connectivity. Another $14 billion goes to low-income families to be able to afford data plans, things like that. And about almost $2.75 billion goes to states. And there, those states are able to use it pretty broadly to increase digital literacy. They can buy devices. So major involvement there. That's what it does for education. Big question. I have a feeling Kevin's going to ask me.
Yeah. What does it not do?
Well, Kevin, we've talked about this one before. What it does not do is it does not do what it initially started out to do. It initially started out to provide money for rebuilding and building schools. With most of our schools at least 50 years old in this country, the bill started out with $100 billion for rebuilding schools. It got knocked down in negotiations to $82 billion, but in the final package, it got knocked down to none. So that, I think, it's probably what people are going to feel the most for it, but most significantly for schools and communities is probably going to be the broadband extension money.
One of the things I understand that Senator Manchin sort of kept repeating over and over again, which was he was obviously responding as a guy trying to be a moderate, trying to straddle the fence there. He was echoing the sentiment of Republicans who said that the overall infrastructure package had too many things that were not considered traditional infrastructure, and that what Republicans like in an infrastructure bill are roads and bridges and all that kind of stuff. And that one of the things that hurt us on the school side was the precedent of having the federal government get involved with school construction and modernization to an extent that they'd never been ever before. And that was one of the reasons why Republicans didn't like a big, huge, construction kind of component on education in particular. At least that was sort of the rumor that was being bandied around. And ultimately, the thing ended up coming out along with some of the other things that were viewed as sort of not typical infrastructure. Like we heard the terminology a lot over the last year, human infrastructure. Republicans didn't like that much. So the idea of ever getting to a place where you would get Manchin and Sinema, and then also, the number of Republican votes that the president did end up picking up on this, which was good. But the trade-off was he had to dump some things. And unfortunately for education, when you look at what the net result was, is that 2 schools directly, not a whole lot, right?
No, not right. Where there is value. I spent 18 years on the Public Works Committee, and I understand the arguments that were made about human infrastructure. That is, if you start putting workforce training programs into an infrastructure bill, yes,
Right.
they're necessary to learn how to build the roads. On the other hand, is that where it ought to be? So those came out. There is some precedent in the past, though, as far as school buildings, and this goes way back with the Ways and Means Committee actually looking at legislation that would permit bonding. In fact, I think it happened under the Clinton administration. The federal government would support bonds that
Right.
local governments would issue in order to rebuild schools. I don't think you can get much more basic than rebuilding schools. It should be pointed out as well that in the stimulus packages, money was there that could be used to renovate schools to make them safe for COVID. And I think that we'll probably even see some attempts by school districts to use ESSER money to do some significant renovations on schools. So schools, I think, can clearly fall into the infrastructure package. Unfortunately, they fell out this time.
Yep. Well, hopefully
So,
we'll find maybe some other way to get there, but
well, so good news about this, and I know there was, I believe on at least maybe the last broadcast or the broadcast before, we were talking about this sort of being a negotiation tool to solve the major budget issue. And Bob, you were talking about that December 3rd deadline looming, because there's only so far it seems they can kick the can down the road, and
Oh no, can get kicked indefinitely,
really.
and may well enjoy Thanksgiving because December the 3rd is a critical day in federal government, but also for the country. The reason is because if you recall, in early fall, the Congress kicked the can down the road on 2 things. It hadn't passed most of the appropriation bills that fund the government for the next year, so it passed what's called a continuing resolution saying we will operate the government at the current levels of spending to December the 3rd. But then once again, it has to be renewed or many government agencies shut down. The second factor is the ceiling limit needs to be raised. The country has borrowed a certain amount of money. It's borrowed more than what the original debt ceiling was, and it now runs the risk of defaulting. Congress approved enough debt ceiling extension to go to December the 3rd, but then has said you have to come back and get it renewed again. These 2 issues alone, I think, can cause a lot of problems. I know that many in the education world are saying the good news is that the House and the Senate have both passed education appropriation bills that increase the Title I spending significantly. However, they have not been enacted. And until they are, then we're under the continuing resolution, and that would be at the current levels of spending. And my guess, looking in a very murky crystal ball, is that probably that continuing resolution will get the can will get kicked down the road at least until January or February. And once you get it kicked down that far, you usually just keep kicking it for the rest of the year.
till the whole year, just let that year go. And Kevin, do you have something to add there?
yeah. And the problem with that, for those of us in the education community, as Bob just mentioned, is it's that Title I increase that the president wanted, which is huge, that we don't get. And one of the reasons why that was going to be important is because the president's initiatives in that appropriations package, in his budget package, would be ongoing money. We've seen so much one-time money, but we really need ongoing money in budgets for schools all across the country, and obviously including California. And so the Title I increase would have been that kind of meaningful, ongoing, permanent increase. And then the second was, and that Bob has told us about before, was this very bold initiative on special ed and putting more money into special ed, the biggest increase that's proposed by the president, the biggest increase in probably 15 years. So in any single year, with the idea of getting to the full 40% over a 10-year period. So those 2 things get lost in a continuing resolution, but at the same time, for the president, it's a victory. You get just getting past the notion of keeping the government open and getting that debt ceiling increase. Those are important wins for the president. But in the long run, for us, we really want to ultimately see those increases in the budget that are permanent. The problem is if this goes through the year, which I think is what will probably happen, then we get into midterms. And if the midterms don't go well for Democrats, then for the president and the idea of a really great budget with big ongoing new investments in the future, instead of doing CRs, you would think that if the election goes kind of the wrong way for the president next November, then when are we going to ever have a chance to get that exponential increase in those really important programs that have ongoing funding? And that's really the worry. But I know it's short term. It's like, let's make sure that Congress is doing what they can to keep the government open, and that we actually have, debt slinging and everything else like that dealt with. So it's going to be challenges left. Great to see the infrastructure piece pass, Bob. But, we called it a 4-ring circus, and we still got 3 rings to go.
Well, still another major ring, and you raised it well. And I think that is the reconciliation package,
Oh,
fancy
right.
term for the $1.75 trillion over 10 years that would be spent. That's where a lot of things on the infrastructure package is that, well, we're not going to put it in there. We'll put it into the reconciliation package. So that's the child care tax credit. That is millions of dollars for things like, let's see, I'm just looking at my list, $200 million more for teacher training initiatives, for principal training initiatives, 112 million for teacher residency programs, 112 million for Grow Your Own, $300 million for emergency E-rate. So Tim, and you're going to ask me when, Bob, when does this pass? I think the next 2 to 3 weeks. I'm going to quote you from that well-known uh, political theorist, Kenny Rogers. You got to know when to hold them. You got to know when to fold them. And for whether you're the most progressive or you're the most moderate Democrat, this is that time to fold them. Because if you don't act now, within the next 2 to 3 weeks, to pass this very slim down package, started at 6 trillion, then to 3.5, now to 1.75 trillion over 10 years. If you don't pass this package now, Kevin, I think, is absolutely correct. The chances are good you're not going to pass, you're not going to get anything passed. And many of these important investments aren't going to happen. So I think it's what they call sometimes the altar call. Everyone needs to come up. Everyone's given something up. And now it's time to say, we got to join hands and get this done.
Well, I know Kenny Rogers is smiling somewhere that you just turned him into a political,
I invoke him constantly.
yeah,
Brad
hey,
Paisley,
I
too.
like it.
He's from West Virginia.
Okay, well let's figure out how to get him in the next show. Thank you for that, Bob. And Bob, I believe it was you brought up the ESTHER funds, and Kevin, you were going to mention that. Can you just give us the latest on the most recent round of ESTHER funding?
Yeah, just that we did get on November 4th the final round of ESSER dollars. It was the last third of the money, $5 billion payment. So now California has received $15 billion of ESSER funds. I would just say people need to pay attention to the deadlines that are out there for the use of the money. Fortunately, it's not a 1-year deal. These dollars will go out to 2024, but there's really good guidance at the state has. And I know, Bob, you were telling me that U.S. Department of Ed's done some good work on this as well.
Yeah, I really encourage, and you were mentioning earlier that so much information is on the CDE website. I'd also encourage people to look at what the U.S. Department of Education is putting out in guidance. They're making it very clear that they want these districts to have maximum flexibility. And as you've talked about many times before, the law permits you to use this money for so many different things, that they want the districts to have maximum flexibility to use these funds, and that even have gone so far as to say state legislatures or SEAs aren't able to, it cannot block a district from using the money if it's in the way that the federal law intends or the federal guidance. So lots of flexibility, and as you point out, it goes for up to 2024. So this is a good time to be doing short-term restoration, and yet at the same time, the long-term planning that you want for real changes.
Can I just pile in there with a really important point, and that is the pandemic started about a year and a half ago, and if you recall, everyone had to buy devices to get a device to every teacher and student at home. Now, these devices only have a shelf life of 3 years. That's a typical expected life. Sometimes you can go beyond that. But as we know, all these apps that we use to communicate with every day are more and more demanding. And the Chromebook you could use 2 years ago, you can't really use for the stuff that we're doing now, even on this broadcast. So I will just say, if this money's burning a hole in your pocket and you want to get rid of it, please save some for the devices that you're going to need in a year and a half when you need to re-up on those. Because yes, the economy is good now, better than anyone thought, but we all know that there's a risk of the economy not being so good. And in a year and a half, it could be bleak circumstances. You could have no dollars available, and you're going to need to replace those devices. So please put some aside for device refresh and start thinking about how you're going to create an ongoing budget, a line item in your budget to replace those devices. You're not going to be able to live without them. So that's something you just have to figure out. And with that, Kevin, I just mentioned how things are quite good right now. We talked about the LAO last time, and I know we're kind of a little bit short on time. So just give us a quick update on the LAO report, please.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to let people know, and we will be doing another broadcast. We'll need to do one probably at the end of next week. You guys know we're not doing them every single week, but we're doing them when we got some news to share. And the nonpartisan legislative analysts will be coming out with their report next week. And that is the report that sets the stage for the budget process. So it'll be a forecast of what's to come. It'll be adjustments in the current year and for what we see happening next year. It's all good information. We know they've sort of leaked a little bit about, and we talked about it at the last broadcast, all these really good numbers. So we'll have more detail on that in the coming week. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention is that we're really paying attention to a lot of critical issues that you guys as districts are going to be facing in the coming year. And I just wanted to make sure people know, because I'm getting a lot of emails about attendance issues, ADA issues, funding issues, declining enrollment. The ADA issue and declining enrollment has about 6 different sort of dimensions to it. And all of them are going to deserve to be attended to by the state legislature. We're going to be talking about it at the CBO symposium, which is going to be happening next week. We'll be talking about it at the CSBA annual conference. You're going to hear a lot more about it. And undoubtedly, it's going to be a major, major issue in the debate over the budget next year. So I just want to make sure that people don't think we're not thinking about those ADA funding issues and declining enrollment and all those kinds of fiscal issues that are facing you. So just wanted to make sure I got that out there.
Thanks for bringing that up, Kevin. I also wanted to bring up something interesting just with a couple minutes that we have left, and that is we've talked about ERate, some of the great changes that have happened. Rosenworcel's been named the new FCC chair. We're excited about that. There was an ERate survey done. The results came in last week, and Funds for Learning posted them. And that is that ERate is covering things. It's covering devices, covering connectivity at home that it never has before. But there's a big push to have ERate cover cybersecurity for schools. And 96% of the respondents, 2,600 people, ERate recipients responded to the survey. 96% said they believe that ERate should help pay for cybersecurity resources for schools. This problem is going to get worse. It's not going away. It's really, really hard for big and small school districts to deal with. So as you're thinking about what you want to advocate for, when you're thinking about what to ask for, we compel people to ask for what you need. Please ask for this type of support if you're in those situations, especially if the conference is coming up, you're having conversations. Let's make this a thing and see if we can try to help in that regard. And just with that in mind, I just mentioned small schools. Bob, I know you had a chance to go out and visit Stuart at Button Willow. Kevin, you were kind enough to set that up for Stuart. But and Stuart is a great friend and watches us a lot and gives us a lot of support, frankly, in social media. So we thank you. But Bob, anything jump out at you when you were there at Button Willow that you'd like to share?
I appreciate, Kevin, the introduction you made. We got together in Washington, and then later last week I went to Button Willow. What impressed me was seeing how Stuart, and I know he represents a lot of small districts in over half the districts in California, of course, is small districts, is how they may not have a lot of resources, but when they make a decision, they can move. And they clearly, in their working with the board, have clearly identified what their priorities are and significantly what they want to do with their ESTHER funds going forward. So that coupled with the additional money the state's putting in. So small districts, I think, can often show, can be models for what can be done. Understandably, they also, when you're in a rural district, E-rate becomes important. connectivity becomes very important. This is a rural district, Buttonwillow, but at the same time, it's also a district where people are working together. And I think that is going to be the key to success over the next few years. It's not just money coming in, it's how you get agreement on how to use that money, how you're going to change or move cultures, and how you interact with a rapidly changing parent demographic, all of which is going to be critically important to success.
And thanks for doing that, Bob, and saying that and actually going on that visit. And you've given this advice before on the broadcast. If you feel like you need some help and support, have your legislators come and visit your school district. There's nothing more compelling than seeing your students going through the things that they're going through and the needs that you have. And that's a great moment where you can really advocate for some of the things that you need, including cybersecurity, which we just talked about. But with that, we're out of time today. And Kevin, as always, thank you so much. Bob, thank you so much. And it sounds like we'll be talking to everybody next week with this LAO report. So hang in there, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.
So thanks again for joining us for another week of this broadcast.
And I just want to take a moment to remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and share this out over social media. Again, you're our marketing team. I'll also finish by saying, if you have some questions, please send them our way. We'd be happy to address them on a future broadcast. So with that, thanks everybody, and we'll talk soon.